Lena Chong had always been someone who thought she could beat time. But lately, time seemed to be beating her. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the same pocket watch she had been staring at for the past few days. It wasn't much to look at, a vintage gold piece, a little tarnished, a little scratched, but it had the power to do what no other tool could, reverse time itself. The first time Lena had used it, she hadn't believed it. The pocket watch had appeared in her hands with no explanation, no instructions. She'd been at the scene of the accident when it happened, the car crash that tore her family apart. And somehow, as if the universe had decided to show mercy, the watch had appeared in her palm just seconds before her brother's car collided with the guardrail. She remembered what happened next as if it was another life, another person entirely. She had activated the watch and felt the world around her snap back like a rubber band, the air around her warping, bending, collapsing, until everything that had happened in the last few moments rewound. She was there again, right before the crash, only this time, she knew what to do. She ran to the intersection where the car would soon come into view, positioning herself to stop it, except she hadn't stopped it. No. She had made the wrong choice. She had changed the wrong thing. Now, each time she used the watch, she felt herself losing something. Little by little, a part of her faded away. Her memories didn't just blur, they vanished. They were slipping through her fingers, leaving behind empty spaces in her mind where once there had been vivid recollections. Lena didn't care, though. She was determined. This time, she would save Ben. This time, it would work. She clicked the watch again, feeling the sickening rush of time folding in on itself. The moment the familiar dizziness settled in her stomach, she blinked. She was standing on the same street corner again. The wind was just as cold. The evening sky was tinged with purple, and the headlights of the car approaching her were bright enough to burn her retinas, but something was wrong. She looked down at the watch in her hand, but it didn't feel right. Her fingers felt detached from the object. It didn't hum with energy like it used to, as though it, too, was tired of her meddling. Still, she ran. The car screeched toward the intersection, its tires skidding. This time, she was ready. She sprinted forward, arm extended to flag it down. The driver swerved, panic in his eyes, but he didn't stop in time. The collision was inevitable. The moment before impact, Lena threw herself forward, diving toward the car. She felt it, her body crashing against the metal, the sharp pain of the collision, but then everything went black. When Lena opened her eyes again, she was back in her apartment, sitting on the floor in the middle of a circle of photographs. The same ones she'd been looking at for weeks. A blurry picture of her brother Ben, smiling. A shot of the old family house, before everything fell apart. And, of course, the accident, those jagged lines, that twisted wreckage of metal and glass. Lena shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her brain. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't remember what. She stood up shakily and stumbled toward the window, staring out at the city below. For a moment, she simply breathed, trying to hold on to something, anything that would give her the answer she needed, but it was gone. The memory of the accident, the reason she kept coming back to that moment, it was slipping away from her, leaving her grasping at nothing. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself. The words felt strange, as if they didn't belong to her. The watch, now cold in her hand, didn't answer. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena barely left her apartment, too absorbed in her attempts to make sense of the time loops. She could remember flashes, Ben's face, the sound of tires screeching, the way the car had spun out of control, but those memories were growing fainter, like a song you've heard too many times and can't quite recall. Her best friend, Maya, came by once, bringing takeout and offering her the usual comforting words. But Lena felt distant, as if Maya was speaking to someone else, someone she barely knew. "You've got to stop doing this, Lena," Maya had said, her voice full of concern. "You can't keep going back. It's messing with your head. You've been trying for weeks now. What if you're making things worse? What if you're not meant to change the past?" Lena had wanted to argue, to tell her that she had to try, that Ben couldn't be gone, that she wasn't going to let the accident be the end. But when she opened her mouth, the words wouldn't come. She felt a deep, aching void inside, a part of herself missing, and she couldn't remember why she cared so much. "What if I'm not supposed to fix it?" she asked, her voice sounding hollow even to herself. "What if this is just something I have to let go?" Maya gave her a long look, as if she could see right through the fragile shell of the woman Lena had become. But Maya said nothing. She just hugged Lena tight, and in that moment, Lena felt something faint and distant, something that felt like her own self, buried under layers of uncertainty. It was later that night when Lena decided to try again. The watch was now a familiar weight in her palm, and though she could feel her mind growing more fragmented with every use, she couldn't stop herself. The accident had to be undone. She had to save Ben. She closed her eyes and activated the watch. The world rushed at her, spinning, flipping, folding. She felt it, her body jerking through time, but this time it wasn't like before. This time, it wasn't just the physical dizziness. This time, the mental chaos was far worse. Her mind felt like a balloon being deflated, her thoughts popping and vanishing as soon as she reached for them. When the world steadied again, she was standing at the same intersection. The familiar headlights loomed large. But something had changed. Ben wasn't in the car. Lena froze, her heart pounding. She stared at the car, her mind racing. What was happening? Where was he? Panic clawed at her. She glanced around, looking for any sign of her brother. But there was nothing. Only the headlights, growing brighter, too bright. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the watch again, desperate to rewind, to fix the mistake, but her mind went blank. Lena stood frozen in the middle of the street, her heart pounding. The car was speeding toward her, the headlights blinding, but there was no Ben in the passenger seat. No moment of reckless fate, no crash, no twisted wreckage. Just the car, coming toward her, like everything was normal. Like nothing had ever gone wrong. She staggered back a step, confused. Panic surged, but her mind was blank, empty. She couldn't think, couldn't remember why she was there. She tried to call out, tried to will herself to stop the car, but her throat tightened, her voice lost somewhere between the chaos of her mind and the disorienting vertigo that always accompanied her rewinds. The car screeched to a halt right in front of her. The driver, a man she'd never seen before, rolled down his window, a strange look on his face. "You all right?" he asked, his voice distant, unperturbed by the sight of her standing in the middle of the road like a lunatic. Lena swallowed hard, her tongue feeling thick, sluggish. She couldn't remember what she was going to say. Her hand trembled as she reached up to touch her forehead, as if trying to steady the thoughts that were slipping through her fingers. Nothing made sense. The man leaned out of the window. "Hey, you sure you're good?" Lena nodded, though she didn't feel good at all. She wasn't sure of anything. The familiar sting of panic curled in her stomach as she backed away from the car. The accident had been here, hadn't it? She had seen it, she had lived it, over and over, so why was it gone? The man waited for her to move out of the street. He wasn't going to get out of the car, and Lena didn't know if she should want him to. So, she just nodded again, forcing herself to breathe, to move. She stepped aside as the car sped off, leaving her standing in the empty intersection. For a long moment, she just stared at the spot where it all should have happened. The place where the crash was supposed to change everything. It was gone. Vanished, her mind screamed, trying to piece it together. It felt like watching a memory through a fogged-up mirror. Every time she wiped it away, the image seemed a little more distant. A little more distorted. She pulled out the pocket watch, as if the action would help ground her. The weight of it in her hand should have been familiar by now, but instead, it felt foreign, heavy in an almost oppressive way. She clicked it open, staring at the smooth, polished face. She should have tried to go back, tried to fix the mistake, but when she attempted to focus, her thoughts just scattered. She couldn't even remember why she was holding it. What was she trying to fix? Her brother's face, the twisted metal, the screaming sirens, they were still there, hovering in the periphery of her memory. But they didn't have the same urgency. They didn't pull her the way they used to. Her fingers trembled as she snapped the watch shut, the cold metal slipping through her grip. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep chasing the past when the past was slipping away. Lena turned, walking quickly away from the street, but every step felt like an attempt to outrun the void inside her head. She needed to find something that would make sense of this, something that would pull her back to who she was before all this began. She found herself at her apartment door before she even realized she'd walked the entire way. It seemed like no time had passed. Her mind was so lost in the fog, in the jumble of thoughts and memories, that she hadn't even noticed the world around her. Inside, everything felt different. Familiar, but not. The place had always been cluttered, old books, half-eaten takeout containers, and scattered papers from her freelance history work, but today, it felt alien. The walls were too close. The air too thick. It was as though the very space around her was shifting, adjusting to her fractured state. She set the watch on the kitchen counter, staring at it like it was some kind of enemy. A thing that had once been a tool, now an anchor dragging her down into a sea of forgetfulness. She should have been grateful for the chance to undo her mistakes, but all she felt now was dread. She had no idea where she was headed anymore. Who she was anymore. Lena sank into the couch, running her hands over her face. She tried to focus, to find something, anything, that would bring her back, but the harder she tried, the less she understood. Why was she trying to save Ben? Who even was she without the memory of him? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It wasn't Maya. She'd been by already. And it wasn't David, not that Lena had heard from him in weeks. The knock was urgent, sharp, like it had been meant to pierce the bubble of numbness she'd been drifting in. Lena opened the door to find an unfamiliar woman standing on the other side. She was tall, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. There was something about the way she stood, an aura of authority, of something powerful, something Lena couldn't place. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, though it didn't sound like an apology. Her tone was direct, almost too sharp. "But we need to talk." Lena blinked, confused. I know you're going through something," the woman interrupted, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "But we need to talk about the watch." Lena's hand instinctively went to the pocket watch on the counter. "What do you know about it?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was something darker, more knowing. "More than you'd think. More than you realize." Lena stepped back, instinctively putting distance between herself and the stranger. Something about her felt wrong. She'd never seen this woman before in her life, but something about the way she talked, the way she looked at Lena, it was as if they shared a secret. Or, rather, as if the woman knew something Lena had forgotten. "Who are you?" Lena demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like she was trying to speak a language she hadn't used in years. The woman sighed, shaking her head like Lena was a child. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been playing with things you don't understand. You've been erasing yourself with every trip back." Lena stiffened, her pulse quickening. "I'm not erasing myself. You are." The woman's voice was calm, but there was something chilling in the way she said it. "You're already losing yourself. Every time you go back, a piece of you disappears." Lena's mind reeled, the pieces of her fractured memories refusing to fit together. "No," she said, shaking her head. That's not what's happening. I'm trying to save Ben. I need to save him." The woman stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Do you even remember why? Do you even remember who Ben is?" Lena froze, her chest tightening. She should have known. Ben, her brother, her flesh and blood, the one she had to save. But the harder she tried to hold onto his face, the more it slipped away. There was something wrong. There was something so wrong, she could barely remember what Ben's voice sounded like. His laughter, his smile, it was like they were fading into the distance, like they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's memories. Ben, Lena whispered, but the name felt hollow. The woman watched her carefully, as if waiting for Lena to understand something she couldn't quite grasp. You can't save him. You weren't meant to. And the more you try, the more you lose yourself. Lena stepped back, her heart racing. No. I have to, you can't. The woman's voice was firm, final. You'll forget why you're even doing this. You'll forget him entirely. You'll forget who you are. And when you do, when there's nothing left of you to erase, that's when it all ends. And it will be too late. Lena stared at her, numb, the world spinning. She could feel the edges of her own mind starting to slip away, pieces of herself scattering like sand in the wind. She reached for the watch again, desperate, but it felt distant now, like a relic from another life. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream that she could still save him, that she wasn't going to lose herself, but the truth was, she couldn't remember why it mattered anymore. The fight was slipping away. Her purpose was slipping away, and in the end, she wasn't sure there was anything left to fight for. Lena stood motionless, the weight of the woman's words pressing down on her like a physical force. You'll forget why you're even doing this, the woman had said, and now that Lena was staring into the abyss of her own mind, she realized just how true that statement was. Her thoughts felt like water slipping through her fingers. She could still remember something about her brother, Ben, something vital, something that felt like it should burn inside her. But the harder she tried to hold on to it, the more it vanished. Her heart raced, panic rising in her chest, and yet, as the seconds ticked by, it began to feel less urgent. The desperation was ebbing away, just like the memories themselves. Who are you? Lena asked again, her voice shaky, less certain than before. She didn't even recognize the sound of it. It was like she was speaking from someone else's mouth. The woman didn't answer right away. She just looked at Lena, her expression unreadable, almost as if she were waiting for Lena to realize something on her own. Then she took a step forward, her gaze steady. You don't need to know who I am, the woman said, her voice low and calm. What matters is what you've become. And what you're about to become. You're already losing yourself, Lena. Every trip back takes more from you than you realize. You've been undoing everything. Rewriting the story you're in, but every time you do, it becomes less yours. Lena's head was spinning. Her vision blurred as she blinked rapidly, trying to focus on the woman's face, trying to remember something, anything, about what she had done, what she was doing here. She hadn't felt this lost in years, and even when she tried to hold on to the certainty of her mission, the need to save Ben, the reasons were slipping further away. I don't understand, Lena whispered. I don't understand any of this. The woman didn't speak for a moment. Her eyes flickered to the pocket watch, still lying on the kitchen counter, cold and lifeless, as though it too had lost its power. Then the woman sighed, a deep, almost regretful sound. You were never meant to fix this, Lena, she said, her tone almost pitying. You weren't supposed to save him. But you didn't listen. You kept going back, thinking you could change the past. Now, look at you. Lena turned her eyes to the watch. Her hands twitched at her sides, her body reacting to it as though it were a part of her. A part that had been worn down with each use, like a tool that no longer performed its function. It should have felt like an anchor, a lifeline, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like something else, something hollow. I don't know why I don't remember, Lena said quietly. Her voice seemed to echo, empty in the small apartment. She didn't remember why she had come back so many times. She didn't remember the urgency, the need to save Ben. It had all become a blur, a fog of indistinct shapes and fading images. The woman stepped closer, her voice cutting through the fog. "You've been here before, you know. You've tried to stop the accident. You've tried and tried again. But every time, you forget more. Until there's nothing left of you to remember." Lena's knees felt weak. She sank onto the couch, her eyes glued to the watch. The woman's words echoed in her mind, louder than the voices in her head, louder than the sound of her heartbeat. "You don't know who I am," Lena whispered, almost as if the realization was hitting her all at once. She was afraid to even finish the thought. "But I know you. I've seen you before. Haven't I?" The woman's face softened, just a fraction. "Yes," she said, the word heavy. "You've seen me. You were me." Lena looked up at the woman in disbelief. What do you mean?" The woman's eyes flickered with something close to sorrow, and she took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "Every time you go back, you change. You become someone else. The more you try to fix what's broken, the more you forget who you were before. Who you really were." Lena felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. The pieces were starting to fit together, but they didn't make any sense. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. I'm not you. I'm me. I'm Lena." The woman's lips quirked slightly, her expression unreadable. "You think you are. But you're not. Not anymore." The words hit Lena like a slap. It felt like a door had been slammed in her face, and something inside her mind, the part that had always been sharp, always been her, snapped open. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled beneath her, and she collapsed back onto the couch. I don't want to forget," Lena whispered. "I don't want to forget anything. I don't want to forget him." Her voice broke on the last word, but it wasn't just Ben she was talking about. It was everything. It was herself. It was the whole damn thing. She didn't want to lose any more pieces of herself. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, heavy and suffocating, like the moment before a storm. Finally, she spoke again, her voice calm but with a hint of something that felt like regret. "You don't get to choose, Lena. You never did. The past is gone. You can't change it. All you can do is move forward. But the longer you fight it, the more you'll lose." Lena couldn't breathe. The weight of the woman's words pressed in on her chest, suffocating her. She reached out for the pocket watch again, desperately, but this time it didn't feel like a lifeline. It felt like a weight. A thing she had no business carrying anymore. What happens now?" Lena asked, her voice small. The woman's expression softened further, the faintest trace of empathy in her eyes. Now you let go." The word struck her, ringing through her mind like the toll of a bell. "Let go," Lena repeated, as though testing the phrase. It didn't make sense. Let go of Ben? Let go of the past? Let go of herself? But the more she tried to hold on, the more it hurt. It felt like trying to clutch onto the wind, like the harder she grasped, the faster it slipped away. She wanted to keep fighting, to keep remembering, but something inside her shifted. Her thoughts began to quiet, and the frantic tug-of-war in her mind started to still. For the first time since this all began, Lena stopped fighting. Her hand, still holding the watch, fell limply to her side, and when she closed her eyes, she finally let herself breathe.